The phone rang at 3:47 in the morning, which in my world meant someone was either dead or about to be. I was in the middle of negotiating a weapons shipment with a particularly nervous arms dealer when Marco's name flashed across the screen. Marco never called unless blood had been spilled or money had gone missing. I held up one finger to pause the sweating man across from me and answered. "This better be worth interrupting my evening, Marco." "Boss, we got a situation at the Raven's Nest." His voice carried that edge I'd learned to recognize over 15 years of working together. Not quite panic, but definitely confusion. "There's a kid here, a little girl. She was left at the door with a bag and some papers." I pinched the bridge of my nose, already feeling the migraine forming. Chicago's streets were cruel to abandoned children, but this wasn't a charity organization. "Call social services. We're not running a daycare." "Boss, you need to see the papers. She says—" Marco's voice dropped lower, and I could hear other voices murmuring in the background. "The kid says she's your daughter." The room suddenly felt too small, too hot. My hands, which had held guns without trembling and signed death warrants without hesitation, went completely still. "What did you just say?" "There's a birth certificate here. Mother's name is Senna Thorne. Date of birth puts the kid at 7 years old. There's also a death certificate for the mother, dated 3 weeks ago. Cancer." Marco paused, and I could hear papers rustling. "Boss, the kid has your eyes. Those same gray storm eyes. No mistaking it." "Senna." The name hit me like a bullet to the chest, dragging me back 7.5 years to a night I'd tried very hard to forget. A hospital fundraiser where I'd been laundering money through charitable donations. She'd been a nurse there, wearing a blue dress that matched her eyes, laughing at something another nurse had said. We'd talked for hours about everything except who I really was. One night. One perfect night where I wasn't Silas Ravencroft, feared underboss of Chicago's most ruthless crime family. I was just a man captivated by a woman who saw goodness in a world I knew was rotting from the inside. She'd disappeared the next morning. No note, no number, no explanation. I'd tried to find her, but Senna Thorne had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed. Now I knew why. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, ending the call before Marco could respond. I turned to the arms dealer, whose eyes had gone wide with obvious relief at the interruption. "We'll continue this tomorrow. Same terms, but I want an extra crate for the inconvenience. Considerate interest on my time." The drive to the Raven's Nest, my flagship nightclub, and the legitimate front for half my operations, should have taken 30 minutes. I made it in 15, running 3 red lights and probably terrifying my driver Constantine with my silence. Constantine had been with me through gang wars and federal raids, but he'd never seen me like this. Hands clenched so tight my knuckles were white, jaw set like granite, mind racing through scenarios I'd never prepared for. The club was closed for the night, but lights blazed in the upper offices. Marco met me at the private entrance, his usually impassive face showing concern. Marco was built like a brick wall and had the emotional range of concrete, but even he looked rattled. "She's in your office, boss. Dante's keeping watch. We didn't know what else to do." He handed me a manila envelope as we walked. Everything was in this: birth certificate, death certificate, immunization records, school reports. There's also a letter. My office occupied the entire top floor, deliberately designed to project power. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline, leather furniture that cost more than most people's cars, abstract art that was actually sophisticated money laundering. Sitting in the middle of my black leather couch, dwarfed by the massive furniture, was the smallest person who'd ever entered this room. She couldn't have been more than 3.5 feet tall, wearing faded jeans with cartoon characters on them and a purple jacket 2 sizes too big. Dark brown hair fell in tangled waves around her face, and she clutched a stuffed rabbit that had definitely seen better days. But it was her eyes that stopped me cold, storm gray, exactly like mine, like looking into a mirror that showed me the child I'd once been, before the world had taught me to become a monster. She looked up when I entered, and instead of fear, I saw assessment. This 7-year-old child was evaluating me with the same calculating gaze I used on my enemies. It was unsettling and strangely impressive. "Are you Silas Ravencroft?" Her voice was small but steady. "I am." I moved slowly, the way you might approach a frightened animal, and sat in the chair across from her instead of behind my desk. Every instinct I'd honed over decades of surviving in the underworld told me this moment mattered more than any negotiation I'd ever conducted. "What's your name?" "Willow Thorne." She hugged the rabbit tighter. "My mama said if anything ever happened to her, I should come find you. She said you were my daddy and you'd keep me safe, even though you're scary." The word daddy landed like a physical blow. I'd built an empire on fear and respect, had ordered deaths without losing sleep, had stared down rivals and federal agents with equal contempt. But this tiny girl calling me daddy unraveled something fundamental in my chest. "I'm sorry about your mother," I said, and meant it more than she could possibly understand. "When did she die?" 3 weeks ago." Willow's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back with determination that reminded me painfully of myself. "The cancer came back really fast. She tried to fight it, but the doctor said it was too late. Before she died, she made me promise I'd come here. She said you'd protect me no matter what." I opened the envelope Marco had given me, needing something to do with my hands. The birth certificate was official, listing Senna Thorne as mother and, shockingly, my name as father. The death certificate confirmed pancreatic cancer as cause of death. But it was the letter, written in Senna's neat handwriting, that destroyed whatever walls I'd kept around my heart. "Silas, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and Willow has found you as I instructed. I'm sorry for the lies, for disappearing, for keeping your daughter from you for 7 years. I had my reasons, and I hope someday you'll understand them. That night we spent together was the most real I'd felt in years. But the next morning, I found out I was being hunted by the Aguilar cartel over a witness protection case I'd worked. A patient I'd nursed back to health turned out to be their accountant who'd testified against them. They blamed me for keeping him alive. I had to disappear to survive. When I found out I was pregnant, I knew I couldn't involve you. Your world is dangerous, Silas. I've seen what happens to families caught in crossfire. But now I'm dying, and I can't protect Willow anymore. You're the only person I trust to keep her safe from the people still looking for me. She's smart, stubborn, and braver than any 7-year-old should have to be. She loves art, hates broccoli, and has nightmares about losing people she loves. She's been through hell watching me die. Please, Silas, give her the stability I couldn't. I loved you that night, and I've loved you every day since through the daughter we made. Protect her. Forever yours, Senna." I read it 3 times, each word carving deeper into whatever remained of my humanity. Senna had been hunted. She'd been alone and pregnant and terrified. And instead of coming to me, to the man who could have protected her, she'd disappeared to protect me. The Aguilar cartel. Mexican drug smugglers who'd been expanding into Chicago for years. We'd had skirmishes, territorial disputes, but nothing that explained why they'd hunt a nurse for 7 years. "Did your mother ever talk about people looking for her?" I asked Willow gently. She nodded, fingers twisting in the rabbit's worn fur. "Sometimes we had to move really fast. Mama would pack everything in the middle of the night and we'd go to a new city. She always said we were on an adventure, but I knew she was scared. The last place we lived, in Cincinnati, some men in a black car followed us from school. Mama got really sick after that. The stress made the cancer worse," the doctor said. Rage, pure and incandescent, flooded through me. The Aguilar cartel had killed Senna as surely as if they'd put a bullet in her brain. They'd hunted her for years, stressed her into illness, stolen years I should have had with my daughter. They'd created this terrified child who'd had to watch her mother waste away while running from shadows. But I couldn't show that fury to Willow. She'd been through enough trauma. So I carefully folded the letter and set it aside, then looked at this little stranger who carried my DNA and Senna's courage. Willow, I need you to understand something. I'm not a good man. Your mother was right that my world is dangerous. But she was also right that I'll protect you no matter what. I leaned forward, holding her gaze with mine. From this moment on, you're safe. No one will hurt you. No one will hunt you. And anyone who tries will have to go through me first. Are you really bad? She asked with heartbreaking directness. Mama said you did scary things, but that you'd never hurt someone who didn't deserve it. How did I explain to a 7-year-old that I ran organized crime operations? That the money funding this building came from weapons deals and protection rackets? That I'd killed men with my own hands and ordered the deaths of dozens more? I do things that aren't always legal, I said carefully. But I follow a code. I don't hurt innocent people. I don't involve children. And I always protect what's mine. I paused, then added what I needed her to hear. You're mine, Willow, my daughter. That makes you the most protected person in Chicago. She studied me for a long moment, then did something completely unexpected. She slid off the couch, crossed the space between us, and wrapped her small arms around my neck. Mama said you'd smell like leather and coffee. She was right. My arms came up automatically, awkwardly, holding this small, fragile thing who'd just upended my entire existence. She was so tiny, so breakable. And suddenly I understood why parents became irrational when their children were threatened. I'd burn Chicago to the ground before I let anyone touch her. The first week with Willow was like learning a foreign language while simultaneously running a criminal empire. On Monday morning, I sat through a meeting about territorial disputes with the Irish mob, while Marco texted me that Willow had refused to eat anything except chocolate chip cookies for breakfast. On Tuesday, I negotiated a truce with corrupt police officials, while my phone buzzed with updates that Willow had locked herself in the bathroom at my penthouse and wouldn't come out. Wednesday brought a weapons inspection at the docks, and the revelation that 7-year-olds required something called playdates with age-appropriate friends. I'd faced down cartel enforcers, federal investigations, and rival mob bosses without breaking a sweat. A 70-pound child brought me to my knees daily. "Boss, we've got a problem," Marco said. Thursday afternoon, standing in my office doorway with an expression that suggested he'd rather face a firing squad than continue this conversation. The kid needs to go to school, and she needs, girl things, clothes, hair stuff. I don't know, maybe someone who can do pigtails? The nanny you hired quit this morning after Willow asked her if she knew how to shoot a gun. I looked up from the shipping manifests I'd been reviewing. Legitimate containers hiding very illegitimate cargo. The nanny quit? That's the third one this week. Yeah, well, this one found Willow in your study looking at surveillance photos from the Kozlov operation. Willow wanted to know why the Russian guy was bleeding. Marco scrubbed a hand over his face. "Boss, I know you're trying, but the kid's been exposed to our world way too fast. She's asking questions 7-year-olds shouldn't even know exist." He wasn't wrong. I'd been so focused on keeping Willow safe that I hadn't considered how abnormal my life would seem to a child who'd spent 7 years living normally with Senna. My penthouse had panic rooms and enough weapons to outfit a small army. My staff consisted of enforcers and assassins who'd kill without hesitation. Every conversation I had involved violence, money, or both. This wasn't an environment for raising a child, but it was my environment, and Willow was now part of my world, whether I liked it or not. "Set up an appointment with that private school in Lincoln Park," I said, making a decision. "The one that costs more than some people's mortgages. They'll take her with enough monetary persuasion, and their security is excellent. Boss, that school has a waiting list years long. They don't just... Marco, I own 3 buildings in Lincoln Park, including the one that houses their endowment fund offices. They'll take her. Also, find me someone who knows about children. Not a nanny. Someone who can teach me what the hell I'm supposed to be doing. That someone turned out to be Vera Kozlov, sister to the very Russian man who'd been bleeding in my surveillance photos. Vera was 60, terrifying in her own right, and had raised 7 children in the middle of Moscow's organized crime world before emigrating to Chicago. When I'd explained my situation, carefully editing out exactly how her brother had ended up bleeding, she'd looked at me like I was the stupidest man she'd ever met. "You want to learn to be father?" she'd said in heavily accented English. "First rule, child needs routine. Bedtime, mealtime, bath time. Same every day. Children need to know what comes next. Makes them feel safe." "I can do routine," I'd said confidently. I ran multi-million-dollar operations with military precision. How hard could a 7-year-old's schedule be? Very hard, as it turned out. Willow had nightmares every night that first week, waking up screaming for Senna. The first time it happened, I'd burst into her room with my gun drawn, expecting threats, only to find her sobbing into that ratty stuffed rabbit. I'd stood there frozen, completely unprepared for this scenario, until instinct had overridden training and I'd gathered her into my arms. "Mama's gone," she'd cried into my shoulder, small body shaking. "She's really gone and she's never coming back." "I know, sweetheart." The endearment had felt foreign on my tongue, but somehow right. "I know it hurts, but you're not alone. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." "You promise?" She'd pulled back to look at me with those storm-gray eyes swimming in tears. "You promise you won't leave me too?" "I promise." And I'd meant it with every dark corner of my soul. "You're stuck with me now." Those nighttime vigils became our routine. Every night around 2 a.m., Willow would wake up crying, and I'd be there. Sometimes we'd talk about Senna, and she'd tell me stories about their life on the run. The small apartments, the middle-of-the-night moves, the way Senna had made every new place feel like home. Other times, we'd sit in silence while I held her. This tiny person who'd somehow become the center of my universe in 7 days. Vera taught me other things too. How to make Willow's favorite breakfast, scrambled eggs with cheese cut into tiny pieces because she hated chunks. How to brush her hair without yanking. Start at the bottom and work your way up. How to read the signs when she was overwhelmed. She'd go quiet and clutch that rabbit like a lifeline. How to make her laugh. Terrible dad jokes apparently worked across all criminal organizations. "Why did the Scarecrow win an award?" I'd asked during breakfast on Friday, feeling ridiculous. Willow had looked up from her eggs suspiciously. "Why?" "Because he was outstanding in his field." The giggle that escaped her had been worth every ounce of dignity I'd sacrificed. Marco, standing guard by the door, had nearly choked trying not to laugh at his boss telling corny jokes. But the hardest part wasn't the routine, or the nightmares, or even the terrible jokes. It was explaining my world to someone innocent enough to believe in fairy tales, but smart enough to recognize darkness when she saw it. "Daddy, why do all your friends carry guns?" Willow asked Sunday afternoon. We were in my study, me working on legitimate business accounts while she colored at the coffee table. Dante and Marcus were stationed by the doors, and yes, both were visibly armed. I looked up from the spreadsheet showing profit margins from my construction company. Completely legal, used for laundering purposes, but technically legitimate. "They're not exactly friends, sweetheart. They're people who work for me." "But why do they need guns for work? Mama was a nurse, and she never had a gun." This was the conversation I'd been dreading. How did I explain violence to someone who'd only ever known her mother's gentle care? "Some people in this world are dangerous," I said carefully, gesturing for her to come sit with me. She abandoned her coloring and climbed into my lap, something she'd started doing that made my chest feel tight in unfamiliar ways. My job involves dealing with those dangerous people sometimes. The guns are to make sure everyone stays safe. Are you dangerous? Her small hand traced the edge of my collar where a scar disappeared beneath my shirt. A knife wound from years ago. Yes. I wouldn't lie to her. Senna had asked me to protect her, and protection started with honesty. I do things that scare people, but I have rules. I never hurt people who don't deserve it, and I always keep my promises. Like your promise to keep me safe? Exactly like that promise. That's the most important promise I've ever made. She thought about this for a moment, then nodded as if my explanation made perfect sense in her 7-year-old worldview. Okay, but Daddy, if someone tries to hurt me, can I have a gun too? Absolutely not. But you just said, when you're older, I'll teach you to protect yourself. But right now, you're 7. Your job is to be a kid, go to school, make friends, and let me handle the dangerous stuff. I tapped her nose gently. Deal? Can I at least learn karate? I couldn't help but laugh. Yes, we can do karate. That's actually a good idea. That night, after I'd read her 3 chapters of some book about magical horses, and she'd finally fallen asleep, I stood in her doorway watching her breathe. The guest room had been transformed over the past week, walls painted soft purple, shelves filled with books and toys, that ratty rabbit occupying pride of place on her pillow. She looked so small in the queen-sized bed, so vulnerable, and I felt the weight of responsibility settle even heavier on my shoulders. I'd killed for less than what the Aguilar cartel had done to Senna and Willow. They'd hunted an innocent woman to death and traumatized my daughter. That debt would be paid in blood. But first, I had to master the art of making school lunches and learning to braid hair. Vera had been adamant that Willow needed normalcy, and apparently normalcy included things like cute braids and fun lunch notes. Marco found me in the kitchen at midnight, watching YouTube videos on how to braid hair, surrounded by practice ropes, and growing increasingly frustrated. Boss, what the hell are you doing? Learning skills, I said grimly, attempting something called a French braid on a rope and failing miserably. Apparently fathers are supposed to know this stuff. Marco stared at me. Silas Ravencroft, the man who'd taken over Chicago's underworld through calculated violence and strategic brilliance, watching hair tutorials at midnight. This is surreal, he finally said. Last week you orchestrated a hostile takeover of the Calabrese family's gambling operations. Tonight you're learning to braid hair. Willow starts school Monday. She needs to look put together, not like she's being raised by criminals. I threw the rope down in frustration. How hard can braiding be? It's just twisted sections of hair. It's braiding, boss, not diffusing a bomb. I've diffused actual bombs. This is harder. Marco picked up his phone and made a call. 20 minutes later, Vera Kozlov arrived at my penthouse, took one look at me surrounded by ropes and YouTube tutorials, and laughed so hard I thought she might need medical attention. Stupid man, she said affectionately, wiping tears from her eyes. You cannot learn braiding from videos. Come, I teach you properly. We spent 2 hours in my kitchen, Vera patiently showing me how to section hair, how to keep tension even, how to secure the end without making it too tight. By 3 a.m., I could manage a basic braid. By 4 a.m., I'd graduated to something that almost resembled the French braid from the video. Good enough, Vera declared. Now you practice every day. Also, you need to take her shopping. Girl cannot go to fancy school with only 3 outfits. I'll have someone buy... No. Vera's voice went sharp. You take her. Father and daughter shopping trip. She needs to pick things she likes, and you need to learn what she likes. This is bonding. Bonding through shopping. I'd negotiated $1 million deals and survived assassination attempts, but apparently retail therapy was my next challenge. Monday morning arrived with the speed of an oncoming train. Willow stood in her new private school uniform, navy skirt, white blouse, little blazer, looking simultaneously adorable and terrified. I'd managed an acceptable braid on the first try, which Vera would definitely hear about. "What if they don't like me?" Willow whispered, as we walked toward Lincoln Park Preparatory Academy. I'd driven her myself instead of sending Constantine, needing this moment with her. "What if they think I'm weird because I don't have a mom?" I knelt down to her level right there on the sidewalk, ignoring the stares from other parents arriving with their children. "Listen to me, Willow. Anyone who doesn't like you isn't worth your time. You're smart, brave, and strong. You've survived things these kids couldn't even imagine. That makes you extraordinary." "But I miss Mama." Her eyes filled with tears. "She was supposed to be here for my first day." "I know, sweetheart. I know." I pulled her into a hug, this small person who'd become everything in just over a week. "Your mama loved you more than anything. She'd be so proud of how brave you're being." "Are you proud of me?" "Every single second of every single day." The first phone call from Lincoln Park Preparatory came 3 days after Willow started school. I was in the middle of a tense meeting with the Calabrese family, who were not happy about my recent acquisition of their gambling operations, when my personal line rang. Only 3 people had that number: Marco, Dante, and now the school. I answered immediately, holding up a hand to silence the angry Italian man mid-threat. "Ravencroft." "Mr. Ravencroft, this is Principal Morrison. I'm calling about Willow." The woman's voice carried professional concern that made my blood run cold. "There's been an incident." I was already standing, already moving toward the door. Marco read my expression and immediately fell into step behind me, while Constantine materialized with the car keys. The Calabrese family would have to wait. Nothing mattered except whatever incident involved my daughter. "What happened? Is she hurt?" I kept my voice level through sheer force of will, but my hands had already curled into fists. "She's physically fine, but emotionally upset. There was an altercation during lunch. Another student made comments about her not having a mother, and Willow responded by pushing the child into a mud puddle and telling her, and I quote, 'My daddy could make your daddy disappear forever.'" Principal Morrison paused meaningfully. "Mr. Ravencroft, we need to discuss appropriate conflict resolution and the concerning nature of that threat." Relief that she wasn't injured warred with pride that she'd defended herself, complicated by the realization that I'd need to teach her how to make threats that didn't reveal family business. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. The drive to Lincoln Park Prep took 8 minutes. I walked into that school with Marco at my back. He'd insisted on accompanying me after I'd explained the situation, and every parent and teacher in the hallway gave us a wide berth. Something about 2 large men in expensive suits moving with predatory purpose made people nervous. Imagine that. Principal Morrison's office was decorated with inspirational posters about reaching for stars and believing in yourself. Willow sat in a chair too large for her, covered in mud, braids half undone, clutching that rabbit. Her eyes were red from crying, but her jaw was set stubbornly. Sitting across from her was a blonde girl in a pristine uniform, and her mother, who looked like she'd never experienced hardship more serious than her latte being made incorrectly. "Mr. Ravencroft, thank you for coming so quickly." Principal Morrison gestured to an empty chair. "This is Mrs. Hartley and her daughter Madison. We're here to discuss the incident and appropriate consequences." "What exactly did Madison say to Willow?" I asked, sitting down and pulling my daughter's chair closer to mine. Willow immediately grabbed my hand with both of hers. Mrs. Hartley spoke before the principal could. "Madison was simply making conversation about families. It's not her fault that Willow got violent. We expect better from students at this institution." I asked what she said, not your interpretation of events. My voice dropped into the register that made grown men confess secrets. "Principal Morrison?" The principal looked uncomfortable. Madison apparently asked Willow why her mother wasn't at drop-off this morning. When Willow explained that her mother passed away, Madison said, and I'm quoting multiple witnesses here, "That's what happens when poor people don't go to good doctors. My mommy says people like your mommy die because they're not smart enough to get good insurance." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. I looked at Madison Hartley with the same expression I used on people who'd betrayed my trust. The child shrank back into her chair. "That," I said quietly, "is what you consider making conversation about families?" Mrs. Hartley flushed. Children understand cruelty perfectly well. They learn it from somewhere." I turned my attention to Principal Morrison. "My daughter lost her mother 3 weeks ago to cancer. She's 7 years old, attending a new school, trying to build a life after watching the person she loved most die slowly. And this child mocked her grief by suggesting her mother died due to poverty and stupidity." "Mr. Ravencroft, I understand you're upset, but Willow's response was physically violent and included a threat that we cannot ignore. We have zero-tolerance policies for... She pushed a bully into mud. That's hardly violence. As for the threat, she's 7. Children exaggerate." I looked at Willow, whose expression had gone from miserable to hopeful. "Did you hit Madison?" "No, Daddy. I just pushed her a little bit. She kept saying mean things about Mama even after I told her to stop." "And what did you say exactly?" Willow's voice dropped to a whisper. "I said you could make her daddy disappear forever. I'm sorry. I know I'm not supposed to talk about what you do. Out of the mouths of babes." I squeezed her hand gently. "We'll discuss appropriate responses at home. But you defended your mother's memory and yourself. That's not something to apologize for." "Mr. Ravencroft, I must insist," Principal Morrison began. "How much did I donate to this school's endowment fund to secure Willow's placement?" I interrupted pleasantly. "That's not relevant to..." $2.5 million. Relevant enough to warrant considering context before punishment? I stood, bringing Willow up with me. "Here's what's going to happen. Willow will apologize for the push and the dramatic threat. Madison will apologize for mocking a child's dead mother. And Mrs. Hartley will explain to her daughter why cruelty disguised as conversation is unacceptable." Mrs. Hartley spluttered. "I will not have my daughter. Your daughter told mine that her mother died because she was poor and stupid. Either Madison learns consequences now, or she grows up to be the kind of adult who kicks people when they're down." I picked up Willow's backpack. "I'm sure you'd prefer the former." Principal Morrison looked between us, clearly calculating whether pushing this was worth losing a major donor. "Perhaps we can resolve this with apologies from both girls and a discussion about empathy in Mrs. Crawford's social-emotional learning class." "Acceptable. Willow?" My daughter looked at Madison with an expression far too mature for 7 years old. "I'm sorry I pushed you into the mud. That was wrong. But you were really mean about my mama, and that hurt my feelings." Madison, to her credit, looked genuinely ashamed under my stare. "I'm sorry too. I didn't know your mama just died. That was mean." We left the school with Willow's hand still gripping mine, her uniform covered in mud, and her head held high. Marco had remained silent through the entire meeting, but I caught him hiding a smile as we walked to the car. "Boss, that was..." "Don't say it. You went full protective dad mode. It was terrifying and hilarious." I shot him a look that usually made people reconsider their life choices, but Marco just laughed. 3 years as my right-hand man had apparently made him immune to intimidation. That night, after Willow had showered and changed into her favorite purple pajamas, we sat together in her room while I attempted to explain the concept of proportional response. "Daddy, why didn't you get mad at me for what I said?" She was cuddled against my side, rabbit tucked under one arm. "Because you were defending yourself and your mother's memory. That's not wrong. But sweetheart, you can't tell people I can make someone disappear." Why not? You can, can't you? I paused, trying to figure out how to explain criminal operations to a child. That's adult business, not something for school conversations. When kids are mean, you tell a teacher, or you use your words to stand up for yourself. You don't make threats about what I might do. But I wanted Madison to know she can't be mean to me because I have a scary daddy who loves me. My chest constricted at those words. Scary daddy who loves me. That's what I'd become. A criminal raising a child who saw my darkness but still felt safe with me. I do love you, Willow. More than I knew I could love anyone. But part of keeping you safe means teaching you when to fight and when to walk away. I kissed the top of her head. You're allowed to be proud that your daddy protects you, but the details of how I protect people need to stay private. Can you understand that? Like when Mama used to tell people we were on vacation instead of hiding. Exactly like that. Some truths are for family only. She nodded against my shoulder, and we sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes before she spoke again. Daddy? Do you think Mama would be mad that I got in trouble at school? No, sweetheart. I think she'd be proud that you stood up for yourself. And I think she'd love that you're so fiercely loyal to her memory. I pulled back to look at her. Your Mama was one of the bravest people I ever met. You're just like her. Tell me about when you met her. I'd told her this story every night since she'd arrived, and each time I found new details to share. The way Senna had laughed, the dress she'd worn, how she'd challenged my cynical worldview with her optimism. Tonight, I told her about the moment I'd known I was falling for her mother. She was talking about why she became a nurse, I said, remembering that night with painful clarity. She said everyone deserves dignity when they're vulnerable, and healthcare was how she gave people that dignity. I'd spent my whole life seeing the worst in people, and there she was, determined to see the best. Did you love her? I did, very much. I just didn't know I loved her until it was too late. I tucked Willow's blanket around her shoulders. But she gave me the best gift she possibly could. She gave me you. Willow fell asleep shortly after that, but I stayed in her room for another hour, watching her breathe and thinking about Senna. She'd been right to hide Willow from me initially. My world was dangerous, and children caught in crossfire rarely survived. But she'd also trusted me enough to send our daughter to me when she couldn't protect her anymore. That trust demanded I become better than I'd been. Not good, I'd never be good. But better, a father who could attend school meetings without threatening principals. A man who could braid hair and tell bedtime stories and still run a criminal empire efficiently. The next 3 years became a delicate balance of two lives. Mornings were school drop-offs and packed lunches with notes that said things like, "Have a great day, sweetheart," inside. Afternoons were homework help and karate classes. Willow took to martial arts with frightening natural talent. Evenings were dinner together, always, no matter what crisis emerged in my other life. Bedtime was stories and cuddles and chasing away nightmares. But between those moments of domesticity, I ran the largest criminal organization in Chicago. I negotiated with corrupt politicians, expanded operations into new territories, eliminated threats with calculated precision. The Aguilar cartel remained on my radar, but they'd gone quiet after Senna's death. Apparently, killing their target had satisfied whatever vendetta they'd held. That should have been a relief. Instead, it felt like unfinished business. Willow thrived despite the unusual circumstances. She made friends at Lincoln Park Prep, carefully screened friends whose families would never suspect what her father really did. She excelled in school, showing particular talent for art and surprisingly strategic thinking. When I taught her chess, she grasped complex patterns immediately. When we played war games, child-appropriate versions, obviously, she demonstrated tactical awareness that reminded me uncomfortably of myself. Daddy, if I move my knight here, you'll think you can take it with your bishop, but that leaves your queen exposed. she'd announced at age 9 during a chess match. Very good. And what would you do if I don't fall for the trap? I have 3 backup plans depending on which piece you move. Marco, watching this exchange from his position by the door, had muttered, "Boss, your kid is going to be terrifying when she grows up." He wasn't wrong. Willow had inherited my strategic mind and Senna's empathy, a combination that would either make her extraordinary or dangerous. Possibly both. By the time she turned 10, Willow knew more about my business than any child should. Not because I'd told her, but because she was observant and intelligent enough to piece things together. She knew Marco and Dante were more than employees. She knew the business meetings I attended often involved violence. She knew people feared me for good reason. But she also knew I'd die before I let anything hurt her. She knew I attended every school event, even if it meant leaving crucial negotiations. She knew I'd learned to braid complicated styles just to make her smile. She knew that beneath the reputation and the violence, I loved her absolutely. "You know what you do is bad, right, Daddy?" she asked one night when she was 10. We were in my study, her working on homework while I reviewed financial reports. "I do." "But you do it anyway." "Yes. Why?" I set down the reports and gave her my full attention. "Because someone has to control the darkness, Willow. If men like me didn't create structure and rules in the underworld, it would be chaos. More people would get hurt. More innocent people." I paused, choosing my words carefully. "I'm not a hero, but I follow a code. I don't hurt people who don't deserve it. I protect what's mine. And I make sure the truly evil people don't gain power." Is that what Mama understood about you? I think so. I think she saw that I wasn't good, but I wasn't completely evil either. I existed in the space between. Willow thought about this for a long moment. "When I grow up, I want to be like both of you. Strong like you, but kind like Mama. Then you'll be unstoppable." Those 3 years were the happiest of my life despite their complications. I'd found purpose beyond power and profit. Every decision I made was filtered through a new question. How does this affect Willow's safety and future? I eliminated threats more efficiently because I had someone to protect. I diversified operations to create legitimate business fronts that could support her if something happened to me. I built alliances that would survive my death and keep her safe. Everything I did for her. But the past has a way of catching up with you, no matter how fast you run or how well you hide. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon in September, when Willow was 10 years old. I was in a meeting with Constantine reviewing security protocols for a shipment arriving from Eastern Europe when Marco burst through the door without knocking, a violation of protocol that immediately set off alarms. "Boss, Willow's been taken." His face was ashen, eyes wide with something I'd never seen from him before. Fear. Real, genuine fear. "They grabbed her leaving karate class 15 minutes ago. 2 vehicles, professional extraction, disabled her security detail without killing them. They wanted us to know this was planned." The world narrowed to a single point of white-hot rage. Someone had taken my daughter. Someone had put their hands on my child and stolen her. Every instinct I'd honed over decades screamed for blood, for violence, for the complete annihilation of whoever had dared touch what was mine. "Who?" The word came out flat, deadly calm that made everyone in the room freeze. "We don't know yet. They left no—" Marco's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, and his expression went from fearful to horrified. "Boss, you need to see this." He turned his phone toward me. The video showed Willow in what looked like a warehouse, tied to a chair, but seemingly unharmed. She looked terrified, but was clearly trying to appear brave, jaw set stubbornly, eyes dry despite obvious fear. Behind her stood 3 men in masks. Then one of the masked men spoke in accented English that made my blood turn to ice. "Silas Ravencroft, we are Aguilar Cartel. You have something we want. territory, respect, and compensation for years of interference. We have something you want. Your daughter. You have 48 hours to meet our demands or the girl dies. Instructions will follow. The video ended. The Aguilar cartel, the same organization that had hunted Senna. They'd killed her through stress and fear, and now they'd taken Willow. The rage I'd been controlling exploded into something cold and calculating. They'd made the worst mistake anyone could make. They'd threatened my child. Get everyone here now, I said quietly. Too quietly. Marco recognized that tone. It meant someone was about to die screaming. Every captain, every soldier, every person who owes us favors. I want the Aguilar cartel's location within 6 hours. I want their organizational structure, their safe houses, their family members, everything. Boss, they said 48 hours. They don't get 48 hours. They don't get 48 minutes. They took my daughter, Marco. They're already dead. They just don't know it yet. I stood, already planning the assault. Call Dimitri and tell him I need his Bratva connections in Mexico. Call Chen and activate his Triad intelligence network. Call everyone we've ever worked with and tell them this is the favor I'm collecting. Within 2 hours, my penthouse had transformed into a war room. 15 of Chicago's most dangerous men sat around my dining table, each representing different factions of the underworld. The Irish mob, the Bratva, the Triads, independent operators, everyone who owed me or feared me enough to help. The Aguilar cartel operates primarily out of Michoacan, but they have cells throughout the Midwest, Chen reported, pulling up maps on the screen we'd set up. They've been expanding into Chicago for years, trying to muscle in on territory. Taking Ravencroft's daughter is either incredible stupidity or a calculated risk. It's desperation, Dimitri added. His Russian accent was thick, but his English was perfect. We've cut into their distribution network significantly over the past year. They're losing money and influence. This is them trying to regain power through leverage. They don't have leverage. They have a death sentence. I studied the maps, noting safe house locations, known cartel members, possible warehouse sites. Willow's somewhere in Chicago. They wouldn't risk crossing state lines with a hostage this high profile. Start with abandoned warehouses in their territory. Cross-reference with properties purchased or rented in the last month by shell companies. That's hundreds of locations, boss, Marco said carefully. Then we search hundreds of locations. We have 6 hours before they expect contact. I want her found before they realize we're not negotiating. My phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Another video. This one showed Willow, still tied to the chair, but now one of the masked men was standing closer to her. The man spoke directly to the camera. 48 hours, Ravencroft. Don't test our patience. The girl is comfortable for now, but that can change. Comfortable for now. I memorized every detail of that video. The lighting suggesting overhead fluorescence, the concrete walls indicating industrial building, the sound of traffic in the background, meaning near a major road, the slight echo suggesting large open space. Every piece of information was a clue to her location. Daddy? Willow's voice came through the speaker, small and frightened but trying so hard to be brave. Don't do what they say. Don't let them win. The video cut off, but those words, don't let them win, they were pure Willow, pure Senna, brave even when terrified. Boss, she's telling you something, Marco said suddenly. That's not just courage, she's giving you information. He was right. Willow was smart enough to know I'd analyze every frame. Play it again. Focus on what's behind her. We watched the video 15 times, examining every detail. On the 7th viewing, Dante spotted it. A logo partially visible on a crate behind Willow. The logo was for Midwest Industrial Supply, a company that I knew had gone bankrupt 6 months ago but still owned several warehouses. There, I said, freezing the frame. Midwest Industrial Supply. They had 3 warehouses in Chicago. Marco, find out which one is in Aguilar territory and still accessible. 20 minutes later, we had the location, an abandoned warehouse in Pilsen, historically Aguilar territory, purchased through a shell company 3 weeks ago. The timing was perfect. They'd been planning this for weeks. We go tonight, I announced. Fast, quiet, and lethal. No witnesses, no survivors except Willow. I want every Aguilar member in that building dead. Boss, respectfully, going in aggressive could get Willow killed if they panic, Dante said carefully. Maybe we should... No negotiation. No waiting. They took my daughter, and they're going to learn why that was the last mistake they'll ever make. I looked around the table at these dangerous men, each one capable of extreme violence. Anyone not comfortable with a massacre can leave now. No one moved. Good. Gear up. We move in 2 hours. The assault on the Pilsen warehouse was planned with military precision. Dimitri's Bratva provided heavy weapons and breaching equipment. Chen's triad offered electronic warfare support to jam communications. The Irish mob created diversions on the other side of the city to pull police attention away. Marco coordinated teams to hit every known Aguilar safe house simultaneously. No one was escaping tonight. I led the primary team, 12 men who'd been with me through wars and federal investigations. We approached the warehouse at 2 a.m., using night vision and suppressed weapons. Thermal imaging showed 15 heat signatures inside, one much smaller than the others. Willow. Remember, I said quietly into the comms. The small signature is my daughter. Everything else is a target. No mistakes. The breach was textbook perfect. Dante's team hit the south entrance while Marco's team took the north. My team went through the roof, rappelling down on tactical lines directly into the main warehouse space. Suppressed gunfire sounded like whispers as we eliminated sentries. I dropped into the warehouse to find exactly what I'd expected. A large open space with concrete walls, overhead fluorescents, crates marked with Midwest Industrial Supply logos, and in the center, tied to a chair, was Willow. She wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming. She was sitting perfectly still, eyes tracking movement around her with the same calculated awareness I'd taught her during chess games. When she saw me descending from the ceiling like an avenging angel, her expression shifted from fear to relief to something that looked remarkably like pride. 3 men guarded her directly. They died before they could raise their weapons. The rest of the warehouse erupted into chaos as the Aguilar soldiers realized they were under assault. But we had surprise, superior numbers, and motivation that turned us into something beyond just armed men. We were a force of nature, eliminating every threat with cold efficiency. I reached Willow in under 90 seconds, cutting through her restraints while Marco and Dante secured the perimeter. She launched herself at me, small arms wrapping around my neck so tight I could barely breathe. "I knew you'd come," she whispered against my shoulder. "I knew you wouldn't negotiate." "Never, sweetheart. Never." I held her close, checking for injuries, finding only bruises from the restraints. "Did they hurt you?" "No. They were scared of you. I could tell. They kept arguing about whether this was a mistake." She pulled back to look at me with those storm gray eyes. "Daddy, I think they wanted to be caught. Like this was a trap or something." Smart girl. Too smart for her own good sometimes. The realization hit me the same moment Marco shouted a warning. The thermal imaging had shown 15 heat signatures, but now I counted bodies. Only 12 Aguilar soldiers, plus the 3 I'd killed. That left 3 signatures unaccounted for. The explosion came from the east wall, breaching it inward with enough force to knock several of my men off their feet. Through the smoke and debris came the missing 3, not Aguilar soldiers, but professional mercenaries in tactical gear. And leading them was someone I'd never expected to see again. Senna Thorne walked through the smoke with a rifle in her hands and murder in her eyes. Eyes that were supposed to be closed forever in a grave in Cincinnati. She was thinner than I remembered, harder, with new scars visible on her forearms, and a coldness in her expression that hadn't existed 7 years ago. But it was definitely her. "Get away from my daughter, Silas," she said calmly, rifle aimed at my center mass. Willow's scream of "Mama!" was the only sound in the suddenly silent warehouse. Time seemed to stop as I stared at the ghost of a woman I'd mourned for 3 years. Senna Thorne, who I'd believed died of cancer, stood 15 feet away with a rifle pointed at my chest and 3 professional killers at her back. She looked like death personified. All lean muscle and cold efficiency. Nothing like the gentle nurse who'd laughed at my terrible jokes 7 years ago. But it was her eyes that broke something in me. Those blue eyes I'd dreamed about, that Willow had described with painful longing, were now empty of warmth. She looked at me like I was a threat to eliminate, not the father of her child. "Mama?" Willow's voice cracked with confusion and hope. "Mama, you're alive? But the doctor said—" "I lied, baby girl." Senna's rifle didn't waver, but her voice softened slightly when addressing our daughter. "I had to make everyone think I was dead to protect you. To protect both of you." My mind raced through possibilities and explanations, trying to make this impossible situation make sense. "You faked your death. The certificate, the funeral, all of it was staged." It wasn't a question. The pieces were falling into place with awful clarity. "You sent Willow to me knowing the Aguilar cartel would come after her eventually. You used our daughter as bait." "Not bait, protection." Senna's jaw clenched. "I knew you'd keep her safe while I eliminated the threat. And I was right. She's alive, isn't she?" "She's traumatized." I kept myself between Senna and Willow, not entirely sure whose side the armed woman was on. "She spent 3 weeks believing you died in agony. 3 years thinking she'd lost her mother forever. Do you have any idea what that did to her?" "I know exactly what it did, because I've spent 3 years tracking down every Aguilar cartel member who ever threatened my family." Senna's voice turned to ice. 63 men, Silas. I've killed 63 cartel members, worked my way up their organization, eliminated every person who knew Willow existed. The 3 men who planned to use her against me, I saved them for last." She gestured with her rifle, and I realized the 3 mercenaries weren't her backup. They were prisoners, bound and kneeling in the shadows. I recognized one of them from intelligence reports, Javier Aguilar, nephew of the cartel's founder and the operational leader for their Chicago expansion. "You set this up," I said slowly. "The abduction, the ransom demand, all of it. You knew I'd find Willow, knew I'd come with overwhelming force, knew the Aguilar soldiers would be trapped between us. I've been hunting these 3 for 18 months. They were too well protected, too paranoid, too careful. But they couldn't resist one last chance at the leverage they've been seeking for years." Senna finally lowered her rifle, but her expression remained hard. "I needed them to come out of hiding, and they needed bait valuable enough to risk everything. Willow was that bait. You put our daughter in the crosshairs." The rage I'd been controlling exploded. "You used a 10-year-old child as part of an assassination plot." "I kept her alive," Senna shouted back. And there, finally, I saw emotion crack through her cold facade. "Do you think this was easy? Sending her away? Letting her believe I died? Watching from the shadows for 3 years while she grew up thinking I'd abandoned her?" "Mama?" Willow's small voice cut through our argument. "You've been watching me?" Senna's expression crumbled. "Every day, baby. Every single day. I was at your school plays, hidden in the back. I was outside your karate class. I watched you learn to ride a bike in Lincoln Park. I've seen every moment of your life, even if you didn't see me. Then why didn't you come back?" Willow pulled away from me, taking tentative steps toward her mother. "If you were alive, why didn't you tell me?" "Because they would have found you." Senna dropped to her knees, setting her rifle aside, tears finally streaming down her face. "As long as these men lived, you weren't safe. They knew about you, had your picture, were planning to use you against me. I had to make them think I was dead so they'd lower their guard. Then I had to hunt them down one by one. For 3 years? You couldn't have finished this sooner?" I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. "I'm one person, Silas. They're a cartel with hundreds of members spread across 2 continents. Yes, it took 3 years to systematically dismantle their organization and identify every person who knew Willow existed." Senna looked up at me with exhausted defiance. "I did what I had to do to ensure our daughter's safety. What would you have done differently?" She had a point, much as I hated to admit it. If someone had threatened Willow, I would have burned the world down brick by brick until the threat was eliminated. Senna had done exactly that. She'd just done it alone, quietly, over 3 years of methodical assassination. Willow stood between us now, looking back and forth like she couldn't decide whether to be furious or relieved. "You let me think you died. You let me cry every night. You missed my birthday 3 times. I know, baby. I know, and I'm so sorry." Senna held out her arms, and after a long moment, Willow ran into them. They collapsed together on the concrete floor, both crying, 3 years of grief and fear pouring out in broken sobs. I watched this reunion with conflicting emotions: relief that Senna was alive, rage that she'd orchestrated this deception, pride that she'd been capable of the sustained violence necessary to protect our daughter, confusion about what happened next. Marco approached carefully, weapon lowered, but ready. "Boss, what are your orders?" "Good question. I had a warehouse full of dead Aguilar soldiers, 3 prisoners who were apparently Senna's endgame, a daughter who'd just discovered her mother wasn't dead, and a supposedly deceased woman who'd spent 3 years as a one-person killing machine. Secure the prisoners, clean up the bodies, make sure this warehouse burns completely once we're gone." I looked at Senna. "We need to talk, but not here. Bring your mercenaries or whatever they are. We do this at my penthouse where Willow can be comfortable." Senna nodded, not releasing her grip on our daughter. "They're former special forces. I hired them to help with surveillance and extraction. They're not involved in the killing. That was all me." Of course it was. Senna had always been capable of surprising ruthlessness when it came to protecting people she loved. She'd proven that by running for 7 years while pregnant, and then with a small child. This was just the next evolution. The drive back to my penthouse was surreal. Willow sat between Senna and me in the back of the SUV, holding both our hands, still crying but also talking nonstop. 3 years of stored-up stories came pouring out. School events, friends she'd made, how I'd learned to braid her hair, the time I'd threatened a principal for her. Senna listened with a mixture of joy and pain, realizing how much she'd missed. "Daddy's really good at bedtime stories now," Willow said, wiping tears from her face. "And he makes breakfast every morning, even when he has important meetings. And he learned karate with me so we could practice together." "He did?" Senna looked at me with surprise. "She needed a training partner," I said simply. "And I needed to spend time with her." "He's really protective," Willow continued. "Like, really protective. One time a boy at school said I was weird, and Daddy showed up at the kid's house to talk to his parents. The boy apologized the next day. I had a conversation with his parents about appropriate behavior," I said defensively. "A completely reasonable conversation that may have involved reminding them who owned the building they lived in." Senna actually laughed, a sound I'd thought I'd never hear again. "You threatened to evict a family because their son was mean to Willow?" I suggested that teaching their son manners would be in everyone's best interest. There's a difference. "He's basically a scary, overprotective dad." Willow said proudly. But also he killed all those men who took me, so I think the overprotective part is actually good. Senna's smile faded. How many did you kill tonight? 12 personally. My men eliminated the rest. Why? I met her gaze steadily. Bothered by the body count? No, just calculating if I need to cover your tracks or if you have that handled. Marco, driving, made a choking sound that might have been a laugh. They're definitely Willow's parents, both terrifying, both calculated, both completely willing to commit mass murder for family. He wasn't wrong. At the penthouse, I sent Willow to shower and change into clean clothes while the adults talked strategy. Senna's 3 mercenaries, former Delta Force apparently, secured the perimeter while she, Marco, Dante, and I sat in my study with glasses of whiskey and the weight of the evening's revelations. So you spent 3 years systematically hunting cartel members, I said, breaking the silence. How exactly does a nurse become an assassin? Desperation and YouTube, mostly, Senna said dryly. Also, I remembered more from my teenage years than I'd realized. My father was military, taught me to shoot before I was 10. I just needed to relearn those skills and apply them to human targets instead of paper ones. And the 63 kills you mentioned? 66 now, including tonight. I kept detailed records. She pulled out a small notebook filled with names, dates, and locations. Every person who knew about Willow, who participated in hunting me, who could have posed a future threat. I verified each kill, made sure they couldn't warn anyone else, moved methodically up the chain. I studied the notebook with growing respect. This wasn't the work of an amateur or someone acting on emotion. This was calculated, patient, strategic assassination. How did you find them all? Patience, research. I spent 6 months infiltrating their organization as a cleaner. Someone who disposes of bodies and cleans crime scenes. Gave me access to their safe houses, their communications, their trust. Once I had the organizational structure mapped, I started eliminating targets from the bottom up. Why bottom up? Killing the leadership would have been more efficient. Because I needed information first. Each person I killed led me to the next. The foot soldiers knew about safe houses. The enforcers knew about money flows. The lieutenants knew about operations. By the time I reached the top, I had complete intelligence on every aspect of their organization. Senna took a long drink of whiskey. The 3 men tonight, Javier Aguilar, Carlos Mendoza, and Paulo Reyes, they're the ones who originally put the hit on me. They're the ones who caused all of this. And now, they're in your hands. What do you want done with them? I want them to disappear. Completely. No bodies found. No closure for their families. Just gone. I want the Aguilar cartel to spend the next decade wondering what happened to their leadership. Her eyes met mine with cold fury. I want them to fear the shadows the way I've feared them for 7 years. This was a side of Senna I'd never imagined existed. The gentle nurse who'd talked about giving people dignity had become something harder, darker. The hunted had become the hunter. Consider it done. I turned to Marco. Take the 3 prisoners to the facility in Gary, the one with the industrial equipment. I'll handle interrogation personally. Boss, maybe... Marco hesitated, looking between Senna and me. Maybe we should talk about what happens after, like, long term. Because this situation is complicated. He had a point. I'd spent 3 years raising Willow as a single father, building a life that included her completely. Now her mother was back from the dead, hardened by years of violence, and we had to figure out how this family functioned. One crisis at a time, I said. First, we eliminate the final threats. Then we figure out the rest. Willow emerged from her room in pajamas, hair still damp from the shower, rabbit clutched under one arm. She looked between her mother and me with an expression far too serious for a 10-year-old. Are you 2 going to fight about who gets to keep me? Senna and I exchanged glances. No, baby, Senna said softly. We're both keeping you. We're just figuring out how that works. Can we all live together? Like a real family? Willow's hope was palpable and heartbreaking. Could we? I looked at Senna. This woman I'd loved once, had mourned, had replaced in Willow's life to the best of my ability. She'd spent 3 years becoming something similar to what I was. A killer with a code. Someone willing to do terrible things for the people they loved. We can try, I said carefully. The integration of Senna Thorne into my life and organization was surprisingly smooth, considering she'd been legally dead for 3 years. We spent the first week focused entirely on Willow. Therapy sessions with a child psychologist who specialized in trauma, family dinners every night, slowly rebuilding the trust that had been shattered by Senna's staged death. Willow struggled with conflicting emotions, joy that her mother was alive, anger at the deception, fear that one of us would disappear again. I'm not going anywhere, I told her every night during our bedtime routine. Neither is your mother. You're stuck with both of us now. Promise? She'd ask, clutching that worn rabbit. Promise. Cross my heart. Hope to die. Stick a needle in my eye. The childhood oath made her giggle despite everything. But beneath the family restoration, darker work was happening. The 3 Aguilar cartel leaders, Javier, Carlos, and Paulo, were being interrogated in the Gary facility. I'd personally spent hours extracting information about cartel operations, remaining threats, and whether anyone else knew about Willow's existence. The answers were satisfying. After Senna's 3-year campaign of elimination, only these 3 had possessed complete information about our family. Everyone else had fragments of intelligence that pointed nowhere. Senna participated in the interrogations with clinical detachment that was both impressive and unsettling. She'd ask detailed questions about organizational structure, verify answers against her own intelligence, and occasionally suggest enhanced techniques when subjects were resistant. This wasn't the woman who'd saved lives as a nurse. This was someone who'd spent 3 years learning to take them efficiently. You're good at this, I observed during a break between sessions. We were watching through one-way glass as Paulo Reyes sobbed in his restraints, broken by psychological pressure rather than physical torture. Better than some of my most experienced interrogators. I had excellent motivation to learn, Senna said flatly. These men hunted me while I was pregnant, threatened my baby, caused me to spend 7 years running instead of living. Yes, I'm good at making them suffer. It's the only thing that's felt satisfying in years. I understood that sentiment completely. Vengeance was a powerful motivator. On the 8th day of our new family arrangement, we held an emergency meeting of Chicago's major criminal organizations, all the factions that had helped rescue Willow. Senna attended as my partner, and the reactions ranged from shock to respect. The story of her 3-year assassination campaign had spread through the underworld quickly. She'd become something of a legend, the nurse who'd become a ghost, the mother who'd hunted an entire cartel. So you're just back now? Chen asked bluntly. Dead yesterday, alive today, and we're supposed to accept this? You're supposed to accept that the Aguilar cartel is finished, Senna replied calmly. Their leadership is being dismantled as we speak. Their Chicago operations are dissolved. Their territory is available for redistribution. I've spent 3 years earning this victory, and now I'm claiming it. With respect, you're a civilian, Dmitri interjected. Killing cartel members doesn't make you one of us. No, being Silas Ravencroft's partner makes me one of you. She looked at me, and I saw the question in her eyes. Was that true? Senna eliminated a threat to my family and crippled an organization that's been problematic for all of us, I said, making my position clear. She's proven herself more capable than most people in this room. If she wants a seat at this table, she's earned it. The silence that followed was calculating rather than hostile. These were pragmatic criminals who understood actions spoke louder than credentials. Senna had done what most of them couldn't or wouldn't, sustained covert operations against a major cartel for 3 years. What do you want from us? Marco asked her directly. What's your angle here? I want my daughter to grow up safe, Senna said simply. I want the Aguilar cartel's resources distributed in a way that prevents anyone else from filling their void. I want a legitimate front that allows me to exist in this world without hiding, and I want a partnership with Silas that protects our family long term. It was a reasonable request, and more importantly, it aligned with everyone's interests. A power vacuum from the Aguilar cartel's collapse could spark territorial wars unless managed carefully. Senna's intelligence about their operations was valuable for that management. We can work with that, Chen said finally. But you understand there's a probationary period? Trust in our world is earned slowly. I spent 3 years earning it by bleeding the Aguilar cartel dry, Senna responded. How much more probation do you need? Several people around the table laughed. She fit our world better than I'd expected. Over the next year, Senna and I built something unprecedented, a true partnership in both family and business. She took over intelligence operations, applying her methodical approach to information gathering and analysis. Her medical background proved surprisingly useful. She understood human biology in ways that made interrogation more effective and knew exactly how to keep informants alive but talking. You're terrifying, Marco told her after she'd extracted information from a Russian smuggler in under 20 minutes without physical torture. Seriously, terrifyingly efficient. Thank you, Senna replied pleasantly. Years of dealing with difficult patients taught me how to manipulate people psychologically. Turns out those skills transfer well. But it was her relationship with Willow that showed the most evolution. Our daughter, initially angry about the deception, gradually understood why her mother had made those impossible choices. Senna was brutally honest about the hunt, the kills, the loneliness of 3 years watching her daughter grow up from the shadows. I would have given anything to be there, Senna told Willow during one of their long talks. Every birthday, every school event, every time you needed me. But if I'd revealed myself too early, before all the threats were eliminated, they would have found us. They would have hurt you to hurt me. Like they tried to anyway? Willow asked. She was 11 now, old enough to understand complex motivations and difficult truths. Yes, except this time your father and I were ready. We eliminated the threat permanently. Senna brushed hair from Willow's face gently. I know what I did was terrible. I know I hurt you. But I won't apologize for keeping you alive. I'm glad you're not dead, Willow said finally. Even if I'm still mad about everything else, I'm glad you're alive. It was a start, more than I'd hoped for, honestly. The final disposal of Javier, Carlos, and Paulo happened 3 months after the warehouse incident. We made it public. Well, underworld public, to send a message. The 3 men who'd hunted Senna for years and threatened Willow simply vanished. No bodies, no evidence, no closure. The Aguilar cartel's remaining members received a simple message. Chicago was closed to them permanently, and pursuing vengeance would result in complete organizational annihilation. They believed us. They'd seen what one determined mother had done to their operations over 3 years. They didn't want to know what she could do with resources and support. Is it really over? Willow asked, the night we received confirmation that the last Aguilar cells had withdrawn from Chicago. We were having family dinner, something we did every night now, no exceptions. Senna had cooked, I'd set the table, and Willow had been relegated to homework duty first. The threat from the Aguilar cartel is over, I confirmed. Other threats will always exist in our world, but this particular nightmare is finished. So Mama doesn't have to hide anymore, and we can be a real family. Senna and I exchanged glances. We'd been carefully navigating our relationship for months. Partners in business, co-parents to Willow, but not quite together romantically. Too much had happened, too much time had passed, too much had changed. But looking at our daughter's hopeful face, I realized she needed more than just 2 parents who worked well together. She needed to see that love could survive impossible circumstances. that family could be rebuilt even after tragedy. Yes, sweetheart, Senna said softly. We can be a real family. All three of us. Together. That night, after Willow fell asleep, Senna and I finally had the conversation we'd been avoiding. I don't know if we can be what we were, she admitted. We were in my study, both holding glasses of wine, years of trauma and violence and survival between us. 7 years ago, I was a different person. You were different too. We've both become something darker. Maybe that's not a bad thing, I said thoughtfully. We understand each other now in ways we couldn't have then. You've lived in my world. You've made the same impossible choices. You know what I am, and you're not afraid of it. Are you afraid of what I've become? No. I'm impressed by it. And honestly, I find it attractive that you're capable of extreme violence in defense of our family. Does that make me a terrible person? Senna laughed genuinely for the first time since she'd returned. If you're terrible, then so am I. I find it attractive that you burned down an entire cartel operation to save our daughter. Maybe we deserve each other. Maybe we do. We started dating like normal people. If normal people discussed assassination techniques over dinner and took their child to karate class between gang negotiations. Willow was delighted to see us together, and honestly, it felt natural. Senna understood my world because she'd become part of it. I understood her trauma because I'd lived my own version of it. By the time Willow turned 12, we'd fully integrated our lives and operations. Senna ran intelligence and strategic planning. I handled enforcement and external relations. Together, we'd built something more efficient and powerful than anything I'd managed alone. The underworld called us the Ravencrofts, with a mixture of respect and fear. A family that couldn't be threatened, couldn't be bought, and definitely shouldn't be crossed. Daddy, can I ask you something? Willow said one night when she was 13. We were in my study, her doing homework while I reviewed shipping manifests for legitimate businesses that were definitely not moving illegal goods. Anything, sweetheart. When I grow up, can I work with you and Mama? Like, be part of the family business? I set down the manifests, giving her my full attention. She was growing up so fast, already 5'4", with Senna's graceful features and my storm gray eyes. Smart as hell, strategically minded, and unfortunately interested in the family trade. That depends, I said carefully. Your mother and I built this empire so you'd have choices. You can go to college, become anything you want, doctor, lawyer, artist, whatever makes you happy. You don't have to follow in our footsteps. But what if I want to? What if I want to learn what you do, be part of what you've built? Senna appeared in the doorway, having overheard the conversation. Then we'll teach you, she said firmly. But first, you finish school. Get educated, learn legitimate skills. The family business will still be here when you're ready. And if I'm never ready, then you live a normal life, and we support that completely, I said. The point of everything we've done, the violence, the empire, all of it, was to give you safety and choices. We won't be disappointed if you choose something different. Willow thought about this, then grinned. I'll probably end up working with you. I'm really good at chess, and Mama says that's basically what you do. Strategic thinking and planning several moves ahead. She wasn't wrong. 3 years later, when Willow turned 16, we finally told her the complete truth about everything. Not the sanitized version we'd given her as a child, but the real story. How Senna and I had met. The one night that created her, why Senna had run, the extent of my criminal operations, the 66 people her mother had killed, and the ongoing work of running Chicago's underworld. She listened to everything without interruption, processing information with the same calculating awareness I'd recognized in her as a 7-year-old. When we finished, she was quiet for a long moment. So basically, you're telling me that I'm the daughter of Chicago's most powerful crime lord, and a woman who single-handedly dismantled a drug cartel, Willow finally said. Yes, Senna confirmed. And you've built this entire empire partially to ensure I'm protected and have opportunities? That's the core of it, I agreed. And you want me to understand all of this so I can make informed choices about my future? Exactly. Willow leaned back in her chair, considering everything. Then she smiled. The same calculating smile I'd seen on Senna's face when she was planning something. I want in, not just eventually, now. Teach me everything. I want to understand the business, learn the strategies, know how to protect what we've built. She looked between us with determination. I'm a Ravencroft. This is my legacy, too. Senna and I exchanged glances. We'd hoped she'd choose something safer, something normal. But looking at our daughter, brilliant, strategic, brave, I realized she was exactly like both of us. This was who she was meant to be. All right, I said finally. But we do this properly. You finish high school, go to college, business management, economics, something useful. Learn legitimate operations first. Then we'll gradually integrate you into the real work. Deal, Willow agreed immediately. But I'm sitting in on strategy meetings starting now. Observer status only. I promise. She kept that promise for about 3 days before making suggestions that improved our logistics operations by 15%. By the time she graduated high school, she was actively contributing to strategic planning. By the time she finished college at 22, she'd effectively become our third partner. The three of us, Silas, Senna, and Willow Ravencroft, built something unprecedented in Chicago's underworld. A true family business where loyalty came before profit, where violence was calculated rather than chaotic, where the next generation was trained properly rather than thrown into the fire. Willow was 25 when she officially took over daily operations, allowing Senna and me to transition into advisory roles. We'd spent 18 years building an empire that could sustain itself through generations. Our daughter had inherited the best of both of us, Senna's strategic patience and medical precision, my calculated ruthlessness and business acumen. Do you ever regret it? Senna asked me one night. We were in our home office. We'd moved out of the penthouse years ago to a more family-appropriate estate in Lake Forest. The life we've given her? The world we've brought her into? No, I said honestly. We gave her power, knowledge, and the tools to survive in a world that's never been safe. We taught her to be strong instead of vulnerable. That's not something to regret. She's killed 6 people now, Senna said quietly. 6 threats she eliminated personally, cleanly, without hesitation. You killed 66. I've lost count of my number. She's our daughter. This was always her likely path. I pulled Senna closer. This woman who'd died and been reborn, who'd become my true partner in every sense. We raised a queen, not a princess. I'm proud of that. So am I, Senna admitted, even though part of me wishes we could have given her something softer. She wouldn't have wanted softer. She's a Ravencroft. That night, I stood in the doorway of Willow's old room, preserved exactly as she'd left it when she'd moved into her own place downtown. That ratty stuffed rabbit still sat on the shelf, a reminder of the terrified 7-year-old who'd walked into my life and changed everything. I'd built an empire before Willow arrived, but she'd given it purpose. She'd made the violence meaningful, the power worthwhile, the darkness bearable. Everything I'd done for 18 years had been to ensure she could inherit a world where she was safe, powerful, and free. The call that changed my life had come at 3:47 in the morning 18 years ago. Marco's voice sang there was a child at the door who claimed to be my daughter. I'd walked into that office expecting a problem to solve and found instead the greatest gift I'd ever received. Willow taught me that love could exist in darkness, that family could be built from violence, that redemption wasn't about becoming good. It was about protecting something worth being terrible for. I'd been a monster long before she arrived. But she'd given me a reason to be a monster with purpose. And in our world, that was as close to salvation as people like us ever got.